Since all living beings, jivas, desire to be happy always without any misery, since in everyone supreme love, Paramapriyam, exists only for oneself, and since happiness alone is the cause of love, in order to obtain that happiness which is one's very nature, and which is experienced daily in deep sleep where there is no mind, it is necessary for one to know oneself. For that, inquiry, jnana vichara, in the form who am I, alone is the principal means, mukhya sadhana. Who am I? The gross body, which is composed of the 7 dhatus, chyle, blood, flesh, fat, marrow, bone, and semen, are not I. The 5 sense organs, jnanendriyas, namely the ears, skin, eyes, tongue, and nose, which individually and respectively know the 5 sense knowledges, vishayas, namely sound, touch, sight, taste, and smell, are not I. The 5 organs of action, kamendriyas, namely the mouth, legs, hands, anus, and genitals, the functions of which are respectively speaking, walking, giving, excreting, and enjoying, are not I. The 5 vital airs, such as prana, which perform the 5 vital functions, such as respiration, are not I. Even the mind, which thinks, is not I. Even the ignorance of deep sleep, in which only the latent tendencies towards sense knowledges, vishaya vasanas, remain, and which is devoid of all sense knowledges and all actions, is not I. After negating as not I, all that is mentioned above, the knowledge which remains alone itself is I. The nature of this knowledge is existence, consciousness, bliss, Satchitananda. If the mind, which is the cause and base of all knowledge, all objective knowledge, and all action, subsides, the perception of the world, jagat drishti, will cease, just as the knowledge of the rope, which is the base, will not be obtained unless the knowledge of the snake, the superimposition, goes, so that the realization of self, swararupa darsanam, which is the base, will not be obtained unless the perception of the world, jagat drishti, which is the superimposition, ceases. What is called mind, manam, is a wondrous power existing in self, atmasvarupam. It projects all thoughts. If we set aside all thoughts and see, there will be no such thing as mind remaining separate. Therefore, thought itself is the nature or form of the mind. Other than thoughts, there is no such thing as the world. In deep sleep there are no thoughts, and hence there is no world. In waking and dream there are thoughts, and hence there is the world also, just as the spider spins out the thread from within itself and again withdraws it into itself. So the mind projects the world from within itself and again absorbs it into itself. When the mind comes out, rises from the self, the world appears. Therefore, when the world appears, self will not appear. And when self appears, shines, the world will not appear. If one goes on scrutinizing the nature of the mind, it will finally be found that one self alone is what is now mistaken to be the mind. What is here called oneself, tan, is verily self, Atmasvarupam. The mind can exist only by always depending upon something gross. That is, only by always identifying a gross name and form, a body, as I. By itself it cannot stand. It is the mind alone that is called the subtle body, Shukshma Sarira, or soul, Jiva. That which rises in this body as I am this body, is the mind. If one inquires, in which place in the body does the thought I rise first, it will be known to be in the heart, Hridayam. That is the source, literally birthplace of the mind. Even if one incessantly thinks I, it will lead to that place, our true state, self. Of all the thoughts that rise in the mind, the thought I, the feeling I am the body, is the first thought. It is only after the rising of this that all other thoughts rise. It is only after the rising of the first person, the subject, I, whose form is the feeling I am this body or I am so-and-so, that the second and third persons, the objects, you, I, she, it, this, and that, and so on, appear. Without the first person, the second and third persons will not exist. The mind will subside only by means of the inquiry, who am I? The thought, who am I? Which is but a means for turning our attention selfwards, destroying all other thoughts, will itself finally be destroyed like the stick used for stirring the funeral pyre. If other thoughts rise, thereby indicating that self-attention is lost, one should, without attempting to complete them, inquire, to whom did they rise? What does it matter however many thoughts rise? The means to set aside thought attention and regain self-attention is as follows. At the very moment that each thought rises, if one vigilantly inquires, to whom did this rise? It will be known to be me. If one then inquires, who am I? The mind, our power of attention, will turn back from the thought to its source, self. Then, since no one is there to attend to it, the thought which has risen will also subside. By repeatedly practicing thus, the power of the mind to abide in its source increases. When the mind, the attention, which is subtle, goes out through the brain and sense organs, which are gross, the names and forms, the objects of the world, which are gross, appear. When it abides in the heart, its source, self, the names and forms disappear. Keeping the mind in the heart through the above described means of fixing our attention in self, not allowing it to go out, alone, is called selfwardness. Ahamukam, or introversion, antarmukam. Allowing it to go out from the heart alone is called extroversion, barimukam. When the mind thus abides in the heart, the I, the thought I, the ego, which is the root of all thoughts, having vanished, the ever-existing self alone will shine. The place or state where even the slightest trace of the thought I does not exist, alone is self, swararupam. That alone is called silence, maunam. To be still, summa irupadu, in this manner alone is called seeing to the eye of knowledge, jnanadrishti. To be still is to make the mind subside in self, through self-attention. Other than this, knowing the thoughts of others, knowing the three times, past, present, and future, knowing events in distant places, all these can never be jnana drishti. What really exists is self alone, atmasvarupam. The world, soul, and God are superimpositions in it like the silver in the mother of pearl. These three appear simultaneously and disappear simultaneously. Self itself is the world. Self itself is I, the soul. Self itself is God. All is the Supreme Self, Shiva Swarupam. To make the mind subside, there is no adequate means other than inquiry, vichara. If controlled by other means, the mind will remain as if subsided, but will rise again. Even by breath control, pranayama, the mind will subside. However, the mind will remain subsided only so long as the breath, prana, remains subsided. And when the prana comes out, the mind will also come out and wander under the sway of tendencies, vasanas. The source of the mind and of the prana is one and the same. Thought itself is the nature of the mind. The thought I is indeed the first thought of the mind. That itself is the ego, ahankara. From where the ego originates, from there alone the breath also rises. Therefore, when the mind subsides, the prana will also subside. And when the prana subsides, the mind will also subside. But in deep sleep, sushupti, although the mind subsides, the prana does not subside. It is arranged thus by God's plan for the protection of the body, and so that others may not mistake the body to be dead. When the mind subsides in the waking state and in self-absorption, samadhi, the prana subsides. The prana is the gross form of the mind. Till the time of death, the mind keeps the prana in the body. And when the body dies, the mind forcibly carries away the prana. Therefore, pranayama is a mere aid for controlling the mind, but will not bring about the destruction of the mind, manunasa. Just like pranayama, meditation upon a form of God, murti dhyana, repetition of sacred words, mantra japa, and regulation of diet, ahara niyama, are mere aids for controlling the mind, but will never by themselves bring about its destruction. Through murti dhyana and through mantra japa, the mind gains one-pointedness, ekagram, just as when a chain is given to an elephant to hold it in its trunk, which is always wandering, but here and there trying to catch hold of things, that elephant will go along holding only the chain instead of trying to catch any other thing. So also, when the mind, which is always wandering, is trained to hold on to any one name or form of God, it will cling only to that. Because the mind branches out into innumerable thoughts, each thought becomes very weak. As thoughts subside more and more, one-pointedness is gained. And for the mind which has thereby gained strength, self-inquiry, atma vichara, will easily be attained. Through mita sattvika ahara niyama, which is the best of all regulations, the sattvic quality of the mind, having been increased, becomes an aid to self-inquiry. Although tendencies towards sense objects, vishaya, vasanas, which have been reoccurring down the ages, rise in countless numbers, like the waves of the ocean, they will all perish as self-attention swarupa dhyana becomes more and more intense. Without giving room even to the doubting thought, is it possible to destroy all these tendencies, vasanas, and to remain as self alone? One should persistently cling fast to self-attention. However great a sinner one may be, it not lamenting, "Oh, I am a sinner, how can I attain salvation?" but completely giving up even the thought that one is a sinner. One is steadfast in self-attention. One will surely be saved. As long as there are tendencies towards sense objects, Vishaya vasanas in the mind, so long the inquiry, "Who am I?" is necessary. As and when thoughts rise, one should annihilate all of them through inquiry, then and there in their very place of origin. Not attending to what is other, anya, that is to any second or third person object, is non-attachment, vairagya, or desirelessness, nirasa. Not leaving self is knowledge, jnana. In truth, these two, desirelessness and knowledge, are one and the same. Just as a pearl diver tying a stone to his waist dives into the sea and takes the pearl lying at the bottom, so everyone, diving deep within himself with non-attachment, vairagya, can attain the pearl of self. If one resorts uninterruptedly to self-remembrance, svarupa smaranai, that is, remembrance of or attention to the mere feeling I, until one attains self, that alone will be sufficient. As long as there are enemies within the fort, they will continue to come out. If one continues to cut all of them down, as and when they come, the fort will fall into our hands. God and Guru are in truth not different. Just as the prey that has fallen into the jaws of a tiger cannot escape, so those who have come under the glance of the Guru's grace will surely be saved and will never be forsaken. Yet one should follow without fail the path shown by the Guru, remaining firmly in self-abidance, atmanishta, without giving even the least room to the rising of any thought other than the thought of self. Atmachintane is surrendering oneself to God. However much burden we throw on God, He bears all of it. Since the one supreme ruling power, Parameswara Shakti, is performing all activities, why should we, instead of yielding ourselves to it, constantly think, "I should act in this way, I should act in that way," when we know that the train is bearing all the burdens? Why should we who travel in it, instead of placing even our small luggage in it and being happily at ease, suffer by bearing our luggage on our own head? What is called happiness, sukham, is but the nature of self. Happiness and self are not different. Self-happiness, atma sukham, alone exists. That alone is real. There is no happiness at all, even in a single one of the things of the world. We think that we derive happiness from them on account of our wrong discrimination, aviveka. When the mind comes out, it experiences misery, dukkam. In truth, whenever our thoughts, desires, are fulfilled, the mind, turning back to its source, self, experiences self-happiness alone. Similarly, during the time of sleep, self-absorption, samadhi, and swoon, and when the things that we like are obtained, and when evil befalls the things that we dislike, the mind becomes introverted and experiences self-happiness alone. In this way, the mind wanders without rest, going out, leaving the self, and then again returning within. Under the tree, the shade is delightful. Outside, the sun's heat is scorching. A person who is wandering outside reaches the shade and is cooled. After a while, he starts out, but unable to bear the scorching of the heat, comes again under the tree. In this way, he is engaged in going from the shade into the hot sunshine and coming back from the hot sunshine into the shade. He who acts in this manner is a person lacking discrimination, aviveki. But a person of discrimination, vivki, will never leave the shade. Similarly, the mind of the sage, jnana, never leaves Brahman, that is self. But the mind of the ignorant one, ajnani, is such that wandering in the world it suffers, and turning back to Brahman for a while, enjoys happiness. What is called the world is nothing but thought. When the world disappears, that is, when there is no thought, the mind experiences bliss, ananda. When the world appears, it experiences misery. Just as in the mere presence of the sun, which rises without desire, ichcha, intention, sankalpa, or effort, yatnam, the sunstone, the magnifying lens, emits fire. The lotus blossoms, water evaporates, and people begin, perform and stop their work, and just as in front of a magnet, the needle moves, so it is through the mere influence of the presence of God, who is without intention, sankalpa, that the souls, jivas, who are governed by the three divine functions, mudozil, or five divine functions, panchakrityas, perform and stop their activities in accordance with their respective karmas. That is, in accordance not only with their prarabdha karma or destiny, but also with their purva karma, vasanas, or former tendencies toward action. Nevertheless, he, God, is not one who has intention, sankalpo. Not even a single action karma will affect, literally touch him. That is, like the actions in the world not affecting the sun, and like the good and bad qualities of the other four elements, namely earth, water, air, and fire, not affecting the all-pervading space, the fifth element. Since it is said in all the scriptures that in order to attain liberation, mukti, one should control the mind. After coming to know that mind control, mano nigraha, alone is the final decision, injunction of the scriptures. To read scriptures unlimitedly is fruitless. In order to control the mind, it is necessary to inquire who one is. Then, how, instead of inquiring thus within oneself, to inquire and know who one is in scriptures? One should know oneself through one's own eye of knowledge, jnanakan. For Rama to know himself to be Rama is a mere necessary. Oneself is within the five shis, panchokosas, whereas the scriptures are outside them. Therefore, inquiring in scriptures about oneself, who is to be inquired into, attended to, setting aside even the five shis, is futile. Inquiring, who am I that am in bondage, and knowing one's real nature, swarupam, alone is liberation, mukti. Always keeping the mind, the attention fixed in self, in the feeling eye, alone is called self-inquiry, atma vichara. Whereas meditation, dhyana, is thinking oneself to be the absolute Brahman, which is existence, consciousness, bliss, Satchitananda. All that one has learnt will at one time have to be forgotten. Just as it is fruitless for one to scrutinize the garbage which is to be collectively thrown away, so it is fruitless for one who is to know himself to count the number and scrutinize the properties of the tattvas, the principles that constitute world, soul, and God, which are veiling oneself instead of collectively casting all of them aside. One should consider the universe, one's whole life in this world, to be like a dream, except that waking is long and dream is short. There is no difference between the two. To the extent to which all the events which happen in waking appear to be real, to that same extent even the events which happen in dream appear at that time to be real. In dream, the mind assumes another body. In both waking and dream, thoughts and names and forms, objects come into existence simultaneously, and hence there is no difference between these two states. There are not two minds, a good mind and a bad mind. The mind is only one. Tendencies, vasanas alone, are of two kinds, auspicious, subha, and inauspicious, asubha. When the mind is under the influence of auspicious tendencies, it is called a good mind, and when it is under the influence of inauspicious tendencies, a bad mind. However bad others may appear to be, one should not dislike them. Likes and dislikes are both to be disliked. One should not allow the mind to dwell much upon worldly matters. As far as possible, one should not interfere in the affairs of others. All that one gives to others, one gives only to oneself. If this truth is known, who, indeed, will not give to others? If oneself, the ego, rises, all will rise. If oneself subsides, all will subside. To the extent to which we behave humbly, to that extent and that extent only will good result. If one can remain controlling the mind, keeping the mind subsided, one can live anywhere.